it's Natasha and thank you so much for joining me today. I had a couple of techniques that I wanted to do today, including some torn paper and then kind of just a little bit different card front that I wanted to try out. And I have had this craft coloured card base here for ages, but you can see that it is all faded down the spine, so I kind of needed to use it up, and today was a good opportunity. So I have a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch card base here in the white. This is the 100-pound Recollections cardstock, and I'm going to cut off half of the front flap of this one. And as I said, this is the kind of a little bit of a fun card front that I'm going to do. Then I am just cutting off part of that, the other part of the card base for here for the craft cardstock. Now I'm simply just using the card base just to use it up really. I couldn't use it as a card base, so I'm just using it as normal cardstock, and I'm going to cut this piece down to, I think, just a little bit smaller maybe than 4 by 5 1/4. I must admit I kind of wasn't measuring these so much as just kind of making sure that one was slightly smaller than the other. So the craft is going to layer onto the black, and you can see I'm not measuring, I just kind of line it up against the craft one and then decide if I need to take a little bit more off. I just want it to be the tiniest slim little border to go around and frame that craft cardstock. Then onto the white piece, I'm going to take some vintage photo distress oxide ink because I don't want it to be so stark white. This one is going to be a little bit of a rusticy, vintagey kind of feel, but I honestly wanted it to be not bright, but I wanted it to have colours. I didn't want it to be all just brown, but I am adding a little bit of the brown vintage photo just to take away that stark white nature of the paper. Then I'm going to bring in my finger daubers, and I have got the Illustrated Gardens stamp set here, and again I'm really enjoying this style of stamp set. I bought the 2 of them. So this one along with the Flower Shop stamp set that I have used in a couple of the videos not too long ago on my channel. So as I said, I'm enjoying using these at the moment. I am going to pop this roughly somewhere in the middle of my piece of cardstock, pick it up with the stamping platform, and then I'm going to use my finger daubers here to help colour in little pieces of this stamp. Now for the leaves and things, I'm going with old paper and peeled paint. Now I'm going to stamp a few times, so this is why it's good to have the stamping platform. That way I don't have to worry about lining it up. And I'm just using the finger dauber to roughly colour the leaves, and I'm going to actually use a different colour for the stem, but because this one's nice and light, it doesn't matter, I can go ahead and use it on the stem as well. Then I'm going to add a little bit of the darker green, this is the peeled paint, just onto some spaces on the leaves. Now again, if you have any other mediums, I mean some of the crayons would probably be really good for this, like the Tim Holtz crayons or the scribble sticks or something like that. Or if you have some watercolor markers, you could just draw straight onto the stamp that way, or some zigs or anything like that would work really well. I'm just using this because it's nice and easy with the ink. Then I'm popping some tattered rose onto the tops here, and I am going to add a little bit more. I'm going to double stamp this a couple of times, but I'm going to add a little bit more color just because that's quite light. So I'm using the right persimmon, and that's going to give it some vibrancy. I am sort of trying to go just around the petals and kind of leave the towards the inside of the flower as the tattered rose color, but again with this technique it's very forgiving, and honestly whatever you do is going to work out really well and really nice, and if you don't like it you can keep adding ink and layers until you do, and that's the beauty of being able to use a stamp platform in this case. So I will show you something in a minute that is also really fun, but I'm not going to use it for this technique. I do have a video coming out on it very, very soon. And I'll show you one thing that you can do. Here is the finished product that I'm going to use for today, but I still have all this gorgeous ink left on my stamp here, so I don't want to waste it, and it can be really fun to work with this. As I said, I have a video coming out. This is kind of the first step that I do, and then I step it up a little bit more, so watch for that one coming. But I'm going to just spray a light amount of water on here, pop down a clean new piece of paper, and then stamp down. And again, this is where you kind of get that really gorgeous watercolor look. And this is just from the leftover inks. I didn't even re-ink this at all, so there's still so much color left on there. And once you leave that to dry and add some highlights and some other bits and pieces to it. There's a couple of more steps you can kind of take this through, and that looks gorgeous as well. But for today, I'm going to focus on this one here. This is a text set of stamps here, and I really like this fine detailed one down the bottom. I'm using the old paper colour, which is one of the colours I used in the leaves of this flower, so that I'm not introducing any new colours at all. And I also didn't want it to kind of take over. I just want it to be really light in the background. I'm not using an acrylic block. I'm just bending it with my fingers to get a little bit here and there. Then this is the fun part. No fancy trimmers needed. I am just going to tear away from me, and I'm going to tear around all 4 edges of this piece of paper. Now this is fun because this takes no skill at all. Everybody can do this and you don't need any tools. I'm just going to rip all 4 sides, and I kind of go slowly, and I don't just do one big long tear. I take little ones so that I get that really nice variated look of the tearing. And then if I don't like something, I just go back and fix it. I change it, I keep going, and I kind of get to this stage, and then I hold it up against my little craft piece of paper to see how much I want to keep taking away, how much of a border I want. I'm sorry that this is a little bit off camera, but I just keep ripping and ripping until I'm happy that everything is roughly even. I don't want anything to be perfectly straight at all, but I also don't want it to be super wonky, if that makes sense. So just once I think I've got a little border around, I am happy and good to go. I do think that the cardstock in the back is a little bit plain here, and there are some things that I want to do from here to both of these pieces of paper. So I am going to take the same vintage photo that I started off with, and I am just going to ink around all of the edges. Now because the edges are kind of ripped, there's sort of some kind of fluffy pieces, I guess, that pop up, and that's okay with me. I really like that look. In fact, in a little bit when I come to the end, I'm going to add in some rips as well, which I really like the look of for this style of card. But I'm putting on just a nice little layer, and that takes away that white edging of the cardstock, the core of the cardstock. It takes that away. So that was what I was going for here, just to kind of colour it up a little bit more. Then once I have done that main panel at the front, I do want to add a little bit more to the craft cardstock. Now I know it kind of seems counterintuitive to add brown to the already craft cardstock, but I do want to kind of darken up those edges a little bit, and then I'm going to add a little bit of interest as well. You could always use a stamp to add a little bit more texture on here. I'm not adding a whole lot of ink around the outside, but just enough to darken it up ever so slightly, because my craft cardstock that I'm using is actually quite a light brown colour. Then I'm popping some of the same vintage photo onto an acrylic block, adding a tiny bit of water, and then I'm using a really small paintbrush to get very small, delicate splatters. In general, the rule is the bigger the paintbrush, or the head of the paintbrush, then the bigger that your splatters are going to be. I knew I wanted nice little ones for this, so I'm using a really fine paintbrush, and that is working really well to get lots and lots of splatters around the outside. I do want to put this aside and make sure that it dries so that I don't smudge all of these splatters, which I definitely have done before. Now I do need to work on the sentiment, so I am using the Lawn Fawn Vellum here. I find that this one works well when I want to heat emboss, and I have this little set here from Crafter's Companion. It has all of these gorgeous, very dainty little sentiments. They are small, they are fine, and I kind of like all those swirls and curls that are in the script. So I have got a piece of vellum there. I'm using some VersaFine Onyx Black ink. I did use the anti-static powder bag before I went to stamp it, which is really important when you are stamping on vellum because it tends to be a little bit staticky. So then once I've done that, just to heat set this or help it along, I'm going to add some clear embossing powder over top, and then I know there is no chance of this smudging at all. I do use the super fine clear embossing powder, and that way it works really well for really fine and dainty sentiments like this one. I'm adding my heat gun to the vellum, and it's not melting at all. I am moving my heat gun around a lot. I don't keep it in one spot for too long. Then I'm going to trim down the sentiment. I just want it to be a nice thin strip across the middle because I don't want it to take away too much from our floral image that we created as well. Now here's where I start kind of putting everything all together. Here is where I'm kind of playing with my card, bring up some of those edges, and I'm actually going to do some small little rips and kind of curl them forwards and then add lots of that same vintage photo so that the underside and the above side is all coloured the same. Now I don't want to do a rip right there because I'm where my sentiment is going to go, so I make sure to go just a little bit lower so that I don't end up popping that in the wrong place. And I really like those little rips. I think it adds a nice kind of touch to this style of card. I'm adding some liquid glue here. This is the Ranger Multi-Medium in the matte finish. That's my go-to liquid glue. And I'm popping it down on that piece of craft cardstock. You can see that all those droplets have dried now, and they have really dried back, and they aren't quite so prominent as they were before. Now my sentiment here felt a little bit too wide, so I'm actually going to take some scissors to it, and I'm going to first of all cut down the edges, but then I'm going to cut it down, just make it a little bit slimmer than it was before. As I said, I want this to take up the least amount of room on the front because yes, it is the sentiment, but I also don't want to take away from that gorgeous image. So once I have done that, I have my little helpers who are always on the scene beside me. So if you see things move around, it's usually because I do have little helping hands. They love to give you a wave. That's my son who was helping me out today. He's playing with some blocks down on the floor beside me, but he loves to pop up and give you guys a wave because he can see his hands in the camera up above me, so he likes that. And anyway, I am going to pop a little bit of double-sided tape. I popped it behind the word thinking there so it's nice and hidden, and that way the sentiment will lie nice and flat instead of kind of gaping a little bit. Then I'm going to add the tiniest little square there behind the U and then fold these pieces back so that they sit nice and flat across the front of my project. And then once I've done that, I've put my usual 4 pieces of tape around the outside. I fold back one of each corner and then a tiny little piece in the middle, so it leaves me 4 tabs out the side because this is a really slim tiny little border, so I want to make sure that it's lined up nice and evenly. And I think just that peeking through of black border really sets off the black sentiment. Then I remember how we cut half of the card front off. Then I'm going to add some liquid glue to half of my card front here and pop it down so it is right in the middle. It's just something a little bit different and a little bit fun, not too crazy and not too out there, and just easy to cut off half of your card front and pop this panel right on, and it still functions perfectly fine as a normal card. In fact, I'll show you in just a second. It sits up perfectly. You don't have to worry about it sitting any different than any other card would. Just making sure there is no glue that is popping out the back there, and make sure that you only put glue on one half of it as you are sticking it down. But other than that, that is my card for today. You can see that it stands up nicely, and I really hope that you've enjoyed this one. I will put all the links down in the description box below, and other than that, I will see you in the next video. Thanks, bye!